Another redistricting redo. We speak with an expert on the ongoing process and when we can expect to see new Assembly district maps. Hi everybody and welcome to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. The messy process, to say the least, of redrawing district maps here in New York continues this week. The Independent Redistricting Commission is redrawing Assembly lines now after a Manhattan judge declared the last go-around didn't follow proper protocol, much like the Senate district maps before them. The maps get redrawn every 10 years following the census. The commission has until December 2nd to submit the new set of maps for the Assembly lines. After that, there will be a series of public hearings where the commission hopes residents will get involved and voice their opinions on what they see.
And so we are doing these maps again, and we are expecting the public to come out and say what they want to say and be heard. And we will take those comments back and reflect and incorporate where we can, and we will submit on a deadline, a fierce deadline.
We're joined now by Jeff Weiss, professor of law, senior fellow at New York Census and Redistricting Institute at New York Law School. Professor Weiss, thanks so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be with you today.
So let's kind of go back to the beginning here. Back in 2014, there was a proposition put forth to New York voters that said what?
In 2014, the voters approved a constitutional amendment that revamped the way New York redraws its congressional and state legislative district boundaries following the decennial census every 10 years.
And that was created what we now know as this independent bipartisan commission. And what has happened now that we're seeing these maps get redrawn over and over again?
Well, the so-called independent commission, because it's actually appointed by the state legislative leaders and it reports to the legislature. But what happened earlier this year is that the commission is tasked with recommending plans to the legislature, and they could submit one set of maps that the legislature could accept or reject. And what happened this year was that the first set of maps was rejected. So the commission attempted to create and submit a second set of maps, but that never happened. It imploded. The commission could not come to any agreement in a stalemate, so it could not fulfill its second round of maps mandate. And the legislature at that point, being late January, early February, picked up the task to create the maps on its own. Governor Hochul signed the maps on February 3rd, and later the same day, a group of Republican plaintiffs went to state Supreme Court in Steuben County seeking to stop the maps from being used because they were improperly enacted. And when all was said and done, the State Court of Appeals held that because the commission failed to submit a second set of maps to the legislature, then the legislature had no power to draw the lines themselves. So subsequently, the congressional, Senate, and Assembly lines were all voided by the courts.
And here we are left now, just the Assembly lines, they were allowed to stay in place because from what I understand, they weren't part of this original lawsuit, correct? So they stayed in place for this cycle.
That's correct. The plaintiffs in the Steuben County case challenged the congressional and state Senate lines, not the Assembly, so the court could not invalidate what wasn't before them, being the Assembly lines. But the court did suggest that if a new lawsuit was brought challenging the Assembly lines, that it most certainly would also be rejected, and that's just what happened. So the Assembly lines were later rejected by a judge in New York County, Manhattan State Supreme Court, but that judge allowed the invalidated plan to be used in last week's election, only for one election in 2022, and has subsequently ordered the commission to go back to work, start from scratch, and suggest new maps for the state assembly to be used in the 2024 elections.
So their deadline's coming up early next month, December 2nd, to have those maps submitted. One, I think, could argue, Professor, that even though they're claiming that this is supposed to be, and as you said at the beginning, a so-called independent commission, split evenly between Democrats and Republicans here, I would find it's almost impossible to create a completely independent commission when it comes to something as politicized as lines for the state legislature.
Well, to create a really independent commission like California Michigan and Arizona have, then the commission plans do not go back to legislatures for approval. The commission's work stands as a final plan uh, by itself. New York doesn't have that. New York's commission is an advisory commission because the state constitution still gives the power to draw the lines to the legislature, but the legislature can only act if it follows the rules. And the courts found, and I think incorrectly, that the legislature did not have the ability to act this year because the commission imploded.
You've done a lot of advising around the state when it comes to this, specifically kind of your expertise here. What would you say, what is the biggest thing aside from leaving it up to the legislature? What else can be done here to ensure, that this stays independent in the future? And how does it have to be put before voters again in order to make a change like that?
Yes, to change the Constitution, we'd require an amendment. And to do that, you'd have to get a proposal enacted or passed by two consecutively separately elected state legislatures, followed by a vote of the state electorate. So it might take a few years to do that, but now it's 2022. I think certainly by 2028, there's enough time to debate this, get something proposed and passed through the Assembly and Senate, and then sent to the voters. So there is time, but the longer we wait, the harder it gets.
Well, exactly. And from what you've heard, folks you have talked to, I would assume the desire is there among the voters, but what about the state lawmakers and the legislators themselves? Is there a desire here to get that change in and get it done?
There's a lot of talk about that and a lot of discussion about the need not to let the same thing happen over again, to let the courts take over a process if the commission fails to do its job. But the proof will be in the pudding to see what the legislators actually consider, what they might propose, whether it's something cosmetic. Regardless, the same process, even if the legislature keeps control of redistricting, changes need to be made to avoid the twists and turns and the Rube Goldberg maze that was created to get a plan through. That can't happen again, or the courts will simply step in 2031, and the same thing can happen over again.
And of course, the big ugly word here we haven't mentioned yet is gerrymandering, and there really hasn't been any outright accusation of that in this case. But for voters, that is certainly something at top of mind for them.
Well, it's a good question because the state courts rejected the congressional plan enacted by the legislature as a partisan gerrymander. But the results of last week's elections demonstrated that even if the failed Democratic plan had been used, Democratic candidates in places like Long Island still would have lost. But the main benefit that the Republicans had in going to court was probably a pickup of maybe one district. It wasn't a wholesale pickup. The elections last week were not, good ones for Democrats generally in New York State, but redistricting was not the major boogeyman. There were other factors. The assembly map was never contested and was actually enacted by the Assembly and Senate on a bipartisan vote. Democrats, Republicans alike, both supported that plan. So the plan that voters used last week might be a good starting point for whatever the commission does. In fact, there might not be anything stopping the commission from simply enacting or recommending the failed plan as the new plan.
What happens, finally, as we wrap up here, Professor, what happens if they don't meet that December 2nd deadline? Where do we go from there?
I'm hearing that they might ask for an extension, and that would not be unrealistic because the judge in Manhattan doesn't really need to have a final plan until the very beginning of 2024. So there's a good year ahead of us to get this work done. But the judge picked December 2nd as the deadline for the commission to first put a draft plan out for the public to comment on when he handed down his decision during the fall. But the commission is looking to meet sometime between Thanksgiving and December 2nd. Don't have any details yet, but we do expect some kind of action soon. Whether it's a plan or it's a request for an extension for more time, we'll know shortly.
Sure, a busy time of year for everybody, for sure. So we'll wait and see what happens. Professor Weiss, thank you so much for your time today. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Gas prices are once again increasing, prompting lawmakers to suggest new actions to ease the strain on New Yorkers' wallets. We'll chat with an economics professor about what's driving the increases and if those higher prices are here to stay. Welcome back to Empire State Weekly. I'm Ryan Peterson here in Albany. Gas prices continue to shift, with some areas seeing an increase as the state average is once again pushing that $4 per gallon mark. At last check, the statewide average was $3.86. It's according to GasBuddy.com. Some are calling for an extension to the state's ongoing gas tax suspension. The measure, which currently saves New Yorkers about 16 cents per gallon at the pump, is set to expire at the end of the year. Some counties cushioning that even more by suspending their own taxes as well. We're joined now by Kajal Lahiri, professor of economics at SUNY Albany, to discuss these fluctuating gas prices and some of the reasons behind them. Professor, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
So let's talk about some of the immediate reasons here as to why we're seeing gas prices fluctuate so much, especially across the state of New York.
Well, there's a political instability behind it, the Ukrainian war that's going on, and it always creates, affects commodities and petroleum prices in general. Okay, that's one big thing that is new for the last 1 year. And as to why it fluctuates across states, is because the markets are different in particular areas. So the demand and supply factors are different, and that affects the fluctuations across the region.
And when it comes to production, we've seen over the past couple years, some refineries, multiple refineries have actually shut down, reducing our capacity a bit. At the same time, these companies are making record profits, yet they don't seem willing to put the money back in, bring these refineries back online or increase their production. But a lot of people would say, well, that points to the U.S. government wanting to pull back from the fossil fuel industry with all this, renewable energy initiatives.
Right, that's in the background, that to pull back from the fossil inputs, right, for fossil inputs and so on. And so, but the refineries cost is not that much to the total gasoline price that we pay at the pump. Okay, it's like a 5-7 cents. And they're in a business, right? You're saying they're making profits. Who is not making profits, right? Over the last many years. And those companies are owned by American households, right? Mostly. So, but I see your point that they're making record profits. And when the prices get high, of course, they make more money, right? But when the prices go low, they make less money. Then we don't talk about that. Right.
And for the wallets of people in and around the state of New York, we saw the state, and we've talked about it already in this show, where the state has suspended the gas tax. That expires at the end of the year. A lot of lawmakers would like to see that extended. Some counties have helped as well by suspending their own. Is that generally a good way of going about this to ease things on folks' wallet, obviously in the short term, but long-term picture, is that the way to go here?
Obviously not. And also, this the fuel tax, state fuel tax, and so on, you have to get the context, like overall picture. It's like, say, 8 cents a gallon, okay? It's not that much, right? You pay, say, $4 a gallon, and you are just paying 8 cents for the whole bill. It's not like 8% on your total bill first. But then you have another 8 cents tax, so 16 cents per gallon. It helps if you can take it off, right, on the common households' budgets, because mostly people drive to work, right, and so that's helpful. And also, it's not that much of money that the state gets out of it. It would be like $500 million a year, and that $500 million in the context of total taxes that we collect could be close to $100 billion, okay? So it is not that much of money that the state is collecting as taxes. Yet it is a gesture to the public that the state is trying to help them, right? By helping a little bit, 16 cents a gallon. So I think on balance, they should, for a while, keep it suspended till the gas prices come down a little bit more.
And if you were advising some of these state lawmakers, aside from saying, yeah, let's continue that suspension of that tax, what are some other measures you think they could take to help ease the price here?
Rather than trying to manipulate the market prices, they can help people who need the help, right? People who drive to work, right? They need it, right? Elderly going to visit doctors' offices and so on. So you target where the need is, and if they can design something. Other than that, releasing some oil from the petroleum reserves is a good idea for a while, right? But these are all temporary measures, right? It cannot be sustained for a long period of time. And in the meantime, you hope that the market improves and overall it starts coming back, because gasoline prices do come down, right? And so, but so far as there's a war lingering in the background, it would keep on putting pressure on our oil prices. That's I feel.
I wonder, real quick as we wrap up here, big picture, as big states like New York and California continue to push for electric vehicles and wanting to sell only new electric vehicles within the next 10 years or so, if these oil companies, somewhere down the line, are no longer producing gasoline, I know there are a lot of other petroleum-based products out there, gazillions of them. How does that affect the economy if these companies are no longer producing gasoline?
Well, they can always do something else, right? And the gasoline demand is not going to go away that easily. Think about cigarette companies, right? I mean, they used to make a lot of money, right? Over the years, they have slowly transited to doing something else, right? They don't produce that much of tobacco or cigarettes. They do something else. It's like that. If the society demands that we get out of fossil inputs and get into renewables, that will happen, but it will only happen very slowly. And these big companies would have ample time to shift to producing other stuff.
Adapt. That's the big word there, adapt.
Exactly.
Professor Lahiri, thank you so much for your time and joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And back and forth when it comes to New York's new gun laws continues. We're going to break down the latest steps on the state's concealed carry law and where the legal battle now stands. All right, welcome back to Empire State Weekly here in Albany. I'm Ryan Peterson. New York's new concealed carry law remains in effect for now without any restrictions, as a stay has been issued by the U.S. Court of Appeals Second Circuit. Capitol correspondent Jamie DeLine tells us more about the ongoing legal battle here.
New York's new concealed carry law requires 18 hours of in-person and live-fire training to get a license and a list of social media accounts of the applicant. In addition, there are now sensitive locations where a person cannot carry a gun, such as schools, healthcare facilities, and park playgrounds. The laws went into effect in September. Gun Owners of America say they are unconstitutional and filed a lawsuit against the state. A U.S. District Court judge struck down some of the provisions. The state immediately appealed, and on Tuesday, a higher court issued a stay to keep the provisions that were struck down in effect as the appeals process continues.
The Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is above that, shot down the judge's injunction, basically said, no, the state of New York can enforce those provisions. So that's kind of where we're at now.
Hogan says he wouldn't be surprised if the case makes it up to the highest court in the country.
Still probably ongoing, and eventually this could become a hot button issue and eventually make its way to the Supreme Court. I mean, that's not guaranteed, but considering the Second Amendment is a very hot button issue in this in this country, I think it could one day make it to the Supreme Court.
In Albany, I'm Jamie DeLine.
All right, stick around. We'll be back with a look at the week ahead in just a moment. But remember, if you've got a comment or story idea you'd like us to look into, you can always let us know via email at empirestateweekly@gmail.com or seek us out on Twitter. All right, and finally from us here on Empire State Weekly, we're looking ahead to the latest progress in New York's growing recreational marijuana industry. We're going to follow up on the latest from the next meeting of the Cannabis Control Board, Monday the 21st. That meeting is coming as the Office of Cannabis Management is scheduled to issue the first round of approved retail dispensary applications. We'll have how those applications will be impacted by the ongoing legal battle to pause the distribution in some counties. But for now, from all of us here at Empire State Weekly, I'm Ryan Peterson in Albany. I'll see you back here next week. Don't forget, you can watch Empire State Weekly all over the state. Here's our full schedule of where you can find it on 10 television stations across New York.